Good evening. My name's Joe Sam Robinson, and it's my pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Glad to be here, as usual.
And I know that political winds blow your way sometimes, but the events going on in New York City must cause a certain restraint in your ambitions, and mine as well. I mean, it does look like there's quite a change in the national psyche underway right now with President Trump. Can you opine on that? I mean, have there been other presidents that presumably should have gone to jail or not to jail? And can you talk about maybe President Harding or other figures that might come to mind?
Well, yes, and I must say we're taping this the day after Trump appeared in New York, and the indictment was given to him. I have not had occasion. I skimmed through it very quickly.
Yes.
But I haven't had time to read it all that carefully. But although Trump is the first president or ex-president ever to have actually been indicted, there have been at least a couple of others that came pretty close. And one that we're hearing a lot about lately is Warren G. Harding, a Republican who was elected in 1920. And I will liken Harding also to Ulysses S. Grant, who was elected president in 1868. And the two men shared a couple of things. First of all, they were Republicans, interestingly enough. There seems to be a pattern there, as Trump was at least nominally a Republican.
Right, yes.
And Grant was not a politician. He was
general, obviously.
Yeah, he's not a politician at all, and he was. I think he was a very good person. He was probably too good to be a politician, and I think that good was his undoing as president. That he appointed cronies who used him. And you had
that's a common story,
yes,
is it not?
Yes, the Credit Mobilier scandal, and
I mean, really, politicians or anyone in power,
yes.
They have to, or of wealth, they have to be
yes.
aware that people will try and make use of them.
Yes, Harding was somewhat more of a politician than Grant was, but he was not what I would call a politician of the first rank. Harding, I think, like Grant, had the advantage of being in the right place at the right time. We're coming out of World War I in 1920, and not just World War I, but about 20 years of really big domestic upheaval, of big government really stepping in for the first time in a large way. You had significant wealth redistribution, you had much more regulation of industry, much more regulation of trade, and Wilson was arguing for an open-ended commitment and involvement in the League of Nations, which was United Nations 1.0. And the American public said, we want no part of this. Our isolationism has served us well up to this point. By going over to Europe, we've gotten 100,000 of our boys killed. We don't want to stay involved. And at this point, Harding, a sort of genial grandfatherly figure from, I believe, Ohio,
yes.
shows up and promises a return to normalcy. I'm not even sure. We've been talking about going to the OED a lot lately. I must find out whether normalcy was actually a word before Harding coined it.
Or did his speechwriter?
Yes, or yes, there is a speechwriter, but you would have thought normality. But
I think in the speech when it was mentioned,
yes.
At least I've seen that speech somewhat,
mm-hmm.
and I was impressed with the amount of intelligence that was in it. And I wondered, could he have done that? So there were a lot of. The flow of language seemed to be pretty elevated, I would say that.
Well, it's interesting because Harding also coined the term bloviation, which he himself defined as talking a great deal without saying much.
Yes.
But at any rate, this is exactly what the voters wanted to hear. He won with what we in our system consider a landslide of well over 60% of the popular vote.
Yes.
But he was not presidential material. A couple of my favorite stories about him are At one point, when some aides brought into his office some important documents pertaining to the League of Nations, he looked at it and said, "I don't know anything about this European stuff." And another occasion when he was holding his head in his hands, going, "God, what a job," and not in a good way. But he appointed cronies. Albert B. Fall, who I believe was his Secretary of the Interior,
Yes.
and Harry Daughtry, who was his Attorney General. Fall in particular got involved in the Teapot Dome, Wyoming scandal,
Yes.
essentially selling government concessions to private industry on public lands and pocketing the money. And things looked really bad, and actually the stress was so hard on Harding to realize he had been betrayed like this, that he died of something, either a stroke or a heart attack, in 1923, and while he was making tour of the West Coast.
Well, now you've put these two figures that presumably could have gotten into trouble had they lived.
Yes.
You could say that. And you mentioned what they had in common, and maybe alcohol could have been something.
Mm-hmm.
And the other point is, I don't know if Grant liked little girls. But maybe at least Harding had some young girlfriends.
Yes.
Which
I wouldn't say. I'm not sure about little. It depends on how little.
well,
Certainly,
I think he was 50 and the girl was
Yeah.
18.
Yes.
Is that-
Yeah.
is
It
that-
was.
I mean, no, it wasn't 8. But
I'm not sure if we got underage, but it
No,
was.
no. Well, it might have been.
Yeah, the eyebrows certainly. The
18.
eyebrows
He had a
would
lot
go
of
up.
girlfriends,
Yes,
and
indeed.
He, he was.
He was a
sort of-
silver fox. He was indeed. He was.
Right.
Yeah.
So in any event, they, in general, obviously it's hard to live one's life away from era, and a more powerful people, it's easy to fall into era.
Yes.
Just in the normal way things go, and the political world being what it is, there's a lot of things going on right now. So maybe I don't know how Trump fits into this situation. In that what the charges against him are fairly lurid. Well, they touch on lurid issues that may have something to do with Harding, possibly.
Yes, and Stormy Daniels was certainly not 18. I think she was a
No,
woman
I
of
think
some
I don't wanna-
sophistication
I
in
don't wanna
these
say
regards.
anything
So
bad
yes.
about anyone, but
Yes.
I think the general public can imagine what the relationship was, if there was one, which I think the president denies that there could have been some relationship that might have centered around money, possibly.
Yes,
we
yeah,
think
so.
We could say that.
And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But just for the record, I must of course include in the list of prior presidents who may have ended up in hot water with the law. The list is of course not complete without the most infamous of all, Richard Nixon, who was in fact named in some of the Watergate litigation as an unindicted co-conspirator. And it's very likely he would have been charged, as his vice president, Spiro Agnew, was for income tax evasion. He would have been charged for something for misuse of power had Ford not pardoned him within a week of coming into power.
You know, I guess, and I noticed, I thought you were going to mention Bill Clinton, but I'll let it go. So,
Well, Clinton, yes, and well, Clinton is a good one, and that of course is back to the little girl theme here.
Whatever. I mean, it seems to be something.
But they essentially pled that out. He did lose his law license in Arkansas, which I'm sure came as a horrible blow to him at that stage. It ruined his entire career.
Right.
So.
I know how well Hillary took that.
But they sort of pled that one
Well,
down.
I mean, it's getting into the story is, and I guess I would kind of say this, that any powerful person generally is doing something to obtain the power and use the power, and may not do it correctly, although many people can handle it. But I think going into politics in America, it would be difficult to be totally above the fray. I mean, obviously, Jimmy Carter is a great example of a person who seemingly was able to do that, and kudos to President Carter. But generally, it's very hard to obtain political office without at least brushing up against all sorts of knavery. Well, if not not you, but your opponent. People are constantly doing deals, and then when one is in power, people attempting to get something from you, befriending you, trying to do something. And so it's just a difficult, being Simon Pure in those circumstances is difficult. And I guess the story would be, can one, having been tainted by just the power of the office, be immune to prosecution later? And should that be the case? And what happens when you leave office? One of the things is that certainly being president, it's possible legally to accumulate a great fortune, as witnessed by the Clintons, or you could say President Obama, or you can give speeches, you can raise money for your cause, you can write books. People will put you on the boards of whatever, of different foundations. People would come with you with paybacks. So certainly a lot of money can be obtained after you've left office for you and your family, as far as that goes. All those things are there. And a question to ask in general about politicians is, if you've been suborned by these interests, and the way you've exercised your office to enact the people's will has been compromised by your own selfish ambitions, and later a lot of money comes in your hands, that doesn't seem to be easily known or followed. And I think in some countries, a big politician would have an accountant look over their income or money, their wealth, and then later it would be looked over again to be sure that nothing had happened. And it's so the patina of corruption is endemic, depending on how you define it, among people that have a lot of power and a lot of resources to help people. And I would say that's pretty common. And the situation with President Trump is that he has firstly, he's running again for office. So, and he has this tremendous record there. He's such a tempting target. And his behavior has certainly engendered many, many enemies. Some politicians try and befriend their opponents to some degree, or to have a softer idea. He certainly has not been the case for him. He's been assaultive against his enemies and pretty outspoken, and so he's generated a huge number of enemies. And they can certainly find something to put him in prison, which would and I'll ask this: is it a good idea to put someone in prison after they've been elected or a politician without pretty much bright line crimes? Pretty much, we mentioned some, but a bright line crime, is that, who goes to jail? And is that a good thing for the country? If everybody is like that, if you're always going to have enemies that you could have done something with, let's say, with the way you turn your campaign finances in. I believe Hillary Clinton had issues. I mean, and who knows all the complexities of law around different political arrangements. It would seem to me it would be pretty easy to find some kind of failing easily. And if your opponents really wanted to do you in, they could then bring charges against you in a venue that would be so tilted against the political arrangements of the former president that it would be impossible to be vindicated.
Well, you realize we could spend hours and
I know,
hours unpacking all of this.
Well, I'll let you start with as you wish.
So, well, I'd first of all say that you seem to be, the tenor of your comments seem to be giving Trump a lot of benefits of the doubt. That I think most people would say that his behavior as president has been well, shall we say, remarkably out of line with that of any previous president. Furthermore, the current charges against him were not about what came his way as a result of being president, but what he was doing while he was running for president. Now, I will say, as an aside, that these charges do seem to me to be fairly lightweight, and that seems to be the consensus among most of the legal analysts who have looked at this, that a lot of people are having trouble figuring out how we get from these essentially misdemeanor charges to the felony charges that they're trying to get him on. Now, I think that if there is an indictment in our own state for actively trying to subvert the political process and finding extra votes, I mean, that could be a much more serious affair. And perhaps, I think what you're getting at, that if the Attorney General, or not the Attorney General, but the District Attorney in New York is going after Trump on these, if you'll pardon me, trumped-up charges, at least partly out of a sense of political motivation, he may be doing a dreadful disservice not only to the country but to the Democratic Party, because if it can be reasonably perceived as having a partisan motivation by being fairly lightweight and trying to jack it into a felony, that could be a huge backfire. But yes, Trump is a polarizing figure. I think some of the things he's done is absolutely outrageous. So I don't think the approach is to say, well, we let Hillary go, so we should let him go. It's if we get him, we should have gotten Hillary as well. So.
Well, firstly, I'll say there's at least one Machiavellian viewpoint here, is that the Democrats want Trump to run because they don't. I've heard it said that the one person that President Biden could beat in an election would be Trump, and so plus the country is just so weary of the whole deal. And so certainly his supporters have been energized, and the general amount of publicity that comes, free publicity, if you want to say that. I mean, if you're I don't know, some heinous crime is you're running for political office, and you get a lot of publicity about your heinous crime, and that's free. It's free. I mean, so politicians may think this is great, particularly if the way that you handle this is you assault the assaulters. So, and the way the country is, people easily accept the viewpoint that the system is corrupt and the deep state is there, and the deep state will try and take out President Trump. And the only way to preserve the country is to put him back in office, whatever his. And this is millions and millions and millions of dollars of free publicity. And so the Democrats may actually be trying to do that.
And I have to interject that this may be a horrible miscalculation on the part of the Democrats, if this is there is a political motivation here. Because we have to remember that in the 2020 election, Trump got the biggest popular vote of any presidential candidate in American history, with the exception of the man he was running against, Joe Biden. And Biden now has a track record of his own. He's been perceived as being old and making various mistakes. So I'm reminded of the 1832 election, Henry Clay versus Andrew Jackson. And Henry Clay was a master politician. He was a very popular politician, had a man of great accomplishments. And he thought that he put together this wonderful trap for Jackson, who was running for re-election, forcing Jackson to veto the Bank of the United States. And Clay figured, well, either Jackson will veto the bank, which is what Jackson really wanted to do, but in doing so, he would lose so much popular support that Clay would become president, or Jackson would have to grit his teeth and hold his nose and vote the bank in. Clay miscalculated. Jackson vetoed the bank and still won re-election. And so that may be something that the Democrats face with Trump if they're not careful.
Well, I mean, just to go through this, I mean, the deep state I guess, comments that Trump puts out there. To me, somewhat of a neutral observer on the situation, well, certainly the whole Stormy Daniels thing is just absurd and every other thing, and it shows, in my opinion, substantial character flaws to get enmeshed in all of this, and that's very unseemly, and every other thing you can say about it. But the way that the charges are centered around the payoff that happened to Stormy and whether it was deducted or not,
yes.
And to me, that's sort of a legal issue. Statute of limitations have expired, a legal sense, in that who knows what people do. I mean, was the accountant doing it? Was the lawyer telling him to do it at some distance from the actual story? And indeed, if you went through anyone's campaign documents, who knows what people are, they're flying around in jet planes to go, I don't know, to see their mother-in-law in Washington State, and by the way, they give a 5-minute interview or something, mm-hmm. and all kinds of things happen. The Federal Elections Commission allegedly looks into this. They didn't find anything, and so to me, the major motivation for this particular inquiry is the aggrandizement of the district attorney, who's been so unseemly. And if you really want to do something, it's going to be very important. The neutrality of the legal system needs to be there, and that's being sacrificed a lot. If people can observe, the person is a politician and has made these statements that he's going to get Trump or whatever, and has been elected on that, and also this may catapult him into a higher political office. Mm-hmm. So if you're a shrewd politician doing this, that would be it'd be a good thing. And so, having said that, I don't think that's the right thing for the country under these circumstances. And the other point about it is the amount of I guess, energy that President Trump will have to expend in this is a big deal, and also the money part of it. Now, it's also said, is he using campaign funds to pay his legal expenses here? That brings up another issue here. But as wealthy as seemingly is, although who can say, this is going to be an extraordinary distraction in the political process. And that may, the fact that many people have a sense of the democratic system has a lot of problems these days in the U.S., and bringing the nation together, that's an external observer, I think, would say, oh, it's not such a good idea. Now, the other point is we can talk about the situation in Fulton County and whatever is going on there. And I don't know all the details about this, but I have heard the four-person, or four-lady, I guess you'd say, speak on television, giving a lot
public
of interviews
yes.
about this, which I thought was unseemly. If in fact this process can be made more serious by just letting here's the statement. The way the sausage was produced, whatever we did here, is not for public to see it. But I would not say anything bad about this lady, but it does appear that there's a certain lack of gravitas, yes. or whatever.
It's a very bad judgment, indeed.
Right,
yes.
to do that, and just the whole, so it trivialized,
yes.
in my opinion, it trivialized this. Now, many people would say, well, this is a more serious charge, and indeed, President Trump's behavior after the election was terrible, in my opinion. Firstly, to cast doubt on what's going on, and I want to stay in power. This is all about me, the welfare of the country. You could say was somewhat secondary, and you can remember the electoral issues between Al Gore and President Bush, and how well Al Gore handled himself mm-hmm. under these circumstances, and also you could say Nixon and Kennedy. Close elections, and so the custom would be, it's very destabilizing for the country, for the loser, to fight this out. And I think, as far as the welfare of the country goes, that was a bad thing for President Trump to have done. And finally, getting into the Atlanta story, so his general ideas about trying to overturn this were, I think, were incorrect, or just in a general sense. And on a tactical sense, the way that he was going about this, there's probably acceptable from some tactical point of view to, if you want to do it, which I think is a bad idea, is to have things examined. And of course, he was like a bull in a china shop asking things to be examined. But finally, my understanding is the phone call that went through was in Georgia. These phone calls can legally be recorded. And I don't believe he knew that. So that was another error. It's a substantial error that you're going to call in, and so that presumably whatever you say is legally recorded. In some states, in some jurisdictions, you can't do it. So that happens. I think exploring whether or not there was I'm asking you to commit fraud in this long conversation. I think that's a reach. But what I'm getting into is that, and we can speak about the venue where a trial presumably would take place was the same venue from whence the grand jury was chosen, and in these political controversies, it's easy to look at the jury pool that would be there in a trial, and presumably most of the people on the jury would have a predisposition to be interested in the success of the Democratic Party in both Manhattan and in Fulton County. A serious question would be, despite the merit or lack of merit for these claims, and I'll ask this question on any politician, any national politician that has any kind of problems with anything, that would, under most circumstances, not rise to the level of a jail cell. Anybody can find a jurisdiction to put the trial in, and they can have enough political animosity toward the person. You can imagine Republicans could do the same thing, and it'd be very disruptive in the long term if you say, well, I'm going to seek political office, and we've said, well, we've all these other problems about doing that. It's a big sacrifice to do it. And then at the end of this, your opponents can find some venue to bring charges against you, where almost for sure the jury pool will take you out, and I'll put that in your plate.
Well, you're going in a couple of different directions, and I'll observe first that I think at one level you're begging the question. You're assuming that Trump has not done anything to deserve this, and we don't know. That's the point. I also will observe that I do think that you're a bit of a cynic when it comes to the idea of the law. You think that law is, that there's no real difference between law and politics, and I will concede that there is a lot more mixing of law and politics than I'm comfortable with, and that seems to be an increasing trend in this country, and I think that's bad for both law and politics. But you're essentially saying that, well, Trump hasn't done anything that rises. Well, we don't know that. And secondly, there's a difference between jaywalking and attempting to subvert the basics of the American political system. And the two party, and this is a problem, this has always been a problem with party politics since the beginning. What happens if a political party values its own goals and its own ends more than it values what we might call the public good, or what Rousseau might call the general will? What if a party, even if it's being short-sighted for doing this, what if a party is willing to throw the country under the bus if it benefits that party? And so, yes, obviously a Democrat is going to put up a good, vigorous defense. If it's a close election, he's going to demand a recount. But at some point, for the good of the system, the Democrat or the Republican, if the Republican is the one doing it, should say, common sense and a respect for the rule of law and a sense of civic duty would say that this person will graciously concede and step down. And we are seeing greater and greater reluctance to do this over the past generation or maybe 2 generations. And Trump is the culmination of that. He didn't just contest it. I mean, Trump, to my knowledge, is still maintaining that the election was stolen and he is the rightful president, or at least should be the rightful president. And that is a very dangerous thing for any public official to say. At some point, even if it is true, it does more damage to the system than it is worth to continue to maintain that. Now, as for the law, I mean, that's how we have juries, and I know you've got an issue. I think you're getting ready to pitch the issue that these juries are not an adequate safeguard, and it comes down to which lawyer is sharper and can make the better deal, and who's got which of the parties has got the deeper pockets and can afford the better lawyer, which jurors can be more easily led by the nose. But can we find a better system?
Well, I mean, I won't get into this too much. I totally agree with you that it was a terrible thing for Trump to do this. It was terrible and bad for everybody. Bad. And I tried to quote some examples where people had put the interest of the country out there. Now,
Yes.
Having said that, it's such a seductive thing to say, well, the election was stolen, because I would say substantial numbers of people think that, well, everybody I know thinks this way, and I haven't met anybody that thinks another way. And how is it possible that something like this happened? How is it possible that this occurred? And so there's a lot of, I guess, feeling that there must be some explanation for what occurred, and ergo, it must be some kind of ballot box stuffing, particularly so because in American history that has happened.
It has indeed.
Landslide Johnson, President Johnson.
The most infamous example in '48 that a ballot box just mysteriously appeared.
Right.
Yes.
And the same thing with President Kennedy being elected in Chicago. So certainly there have been lots of stories
Yes.
along that. But I think what's not been addressed is in democracy or whatever, the assumption would be one man, one vote, or one lady, you could say, one vote, whatever.
These days it's one person, one vote.
all right,
The original was one man, one vote.
Right, okay,
but then
whatever, and
so.
even the number of genders we have is
Yes.
maybe
A person.
At least more than 2 these days,
Yes.
according to some circles. But in any event, okay, that's the system, and we think there's going to be a person that's going to sit around the kitchen table and think, well, kind of a Norman Rockwell kind of thing. This is my belief. I'm going to go register this, and I've thought about it. And well, in general, there's a major predisposition not to go through the trouble of doing it. So in American elections, some figure like, I don't know, 50% vote. Maybe that's a good election. And just people, that's point number one. Point number 2 is being informed and really coming to grips with these issues is very difficult, particularly if you have just one set of information sources coming to you, which we can certainly see in the internet and television. Well, I only listen to one person. Okay, having said all those things, you could question how difficult it is to really understand all the issues, etc. So one of the things that is going on, I think, that really is the better thing to consider is so-called ballot harvesting. So if you have a lot of money, you can give a lot of money to an organization that will go door to door and basically have, this is something new, I think, please sign this ballot, and they can also go to nursing homes, and they can also seek out people. If you look at the way that mentation goes down for many reasons, maybe a person is hardly aware of where they are, but will sign a piece of paper, and there can be the person getting these ballots can get some financial reward, and so the system could be corrupted at that level, and that's where I think if you wanted to turn attention to rectifying the arrangement, that would be something to consider. And I don't think that was the whole story was somebody was just going to push a button and 100,000 ballots would appear. Well, I don't. That certainly didn't happen. But on the other hand, just the philosophy and the idea of doing it, going to nursing homes and getting ballots or whatever, and having the amount of money necessary to do that, there's something that needs consideration. And I don't think that's been brought up enough. And that would be, to me, that would have been something that there'd be reason to discuss. But so the idea that somebody pushed a button and 100,000 ballots appeared, that's, I think, quite wrong. And that's been my thought about it.
Well, I'm not sure if that's so true, because as we move into the age of artificial intelligence, firmware is a big thing these days. You say, how does anybody know what works anymore? How do you really know the internal workings of your office computer? Several years ago, it was discovered that flash drives, just plain garden variety flash drives, you can buy one for $3 or $4 at any Office Depot or Walmart, right, or what have you, that they could be implanted with virus firmware that could not be detected by your system. It could infect your system with anything it wanted to do, turn it into a pornography node, right, or anything. So this is the whole idea behind the Dominion thing. Did Dominion do something? I don't know. I really have no reason to think so. But could this be done in the future, in a way that is perhaps undetectable? Absolutely, yes. So this is the ultimate extension of mass democracy voting, and where it ends, I have no idea.
Well, we've each of us have raised question marks that need being addressed so that people continue to have faith in the democratic process.
Or regain it.
Or regain it. Well, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you, sir.
You did good here. Thank you, as usual.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.